Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a Mark Wahlberg film called Joe Bell. So, this is supposedly based on a true story, and when actually going through this film, I was like, man, this film is so freaking sad. Like, this movie is such a depressing piece. And so a lot of people are kind of like, especially when it's a Mark Wahlberg movie, people are just like, well, should I watch this? Should I not watch this? Like really through this movie, it's just a very slow pace of a film. Like we just basically have a guy who is just to walk around our planet Earth, basically called the United States of America, to trying to create change. He's walking for change. He's basically walking everywhere, camping in certain spots to try and stop bullying because evidently his son, who is Jaden, eventually is to come out to his parents that he is gay. And so evidently Jaden had gotten bullied so much or so often that Joe decided to eventually go and do this walk to try to stop bullying. Like, that's all I think that I can say at this portion, just because eventually, like, uh, there is to be some kind of thing going on in this movie where I can't go further into what actually happens. Like, in the very beginning of this, there are to be some fun spots, but then eventually you realize what really Mark Wahlberg's character is actually just doing. And so, and I'll get to that when we actually get to spoilers of what I mean by that. So, we eventually see this guy who is walking, and eventually things are to consistently be a struggle. We have him at some points going and camping out, and there's other points where it's to be him going and getting some kind of hotel for the night. Uh, and so we end up finding out that his wife is to be drinking because of kind of what's all going on, what's all kind of transpiring. And so we also see Joseph Bell, who's to be this like wrestler and so on, this amateur wrestler in high school. So eventually all this kind of accumulates to being is just this consistent journey of walking, and really that's all that this movie has entailed. It's like, man, this movie is like an hour and change, and like there is some decent parts in this movie, but I can also just say that this movie is depressing. This movie is this movie is so sad. It's just like, man, you just want to like, oh man, like once you find out what the actual story is about, because I didn't go into it, I went into it completely blind. Um, I was just like, man, I feel like so sad for Jaden's character, who is to be uh, Joe's son, and you just really just go through this story, and you just kind of get like very much like saddened where all of this starts to really head. And it's just like, man, like they just try to like pull at your heartstrings or whatever. So for anybody who is to get in this movie and to go in here blind, in time I'm going to tell you the spoilers of this so you can get ready for this movie if you just want to hear what goes on into it anyways. Ba 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 ba. So I think with that said, I'm just gonna get into spoilers about this movie because, like, I don't think it's gonna take a lot of time. It's just a lot of walking in a movie, in all honesty. But like, really, there's a whole like thing about that. There's a whole message behind that. There's a whole like reason why this guy, like, at some points is almost thinking about giving up. And and just turning around and just going home. And but he just keeps on to eventually get some kind of inspiration to keep on walking, to keep on going. So, with that said, let's go into spoilers about this. Let's go out of our way to say that it's about that coveted time to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time you do spoil this movie. So, very beginning of this, we are to have kind of a number of things kind of play out, but here's the way that this is kind of to break down. So, we have Jaden, who early in this movie is to mention to his father that he's gay, and it seems that Joe like accepts this, but then again, there is also this kind of odd kind of scenes that end up going in here to make it be like, well, maybe Joe can accept it, but maybe others can't, and where we start to eventually seeing a lot of other people not accepting Jaden in this place, in this world, in this whatever, just is really difficult to see and watch and whatever. So, like, we have, like, Joe kind of mentioning that he was, like, fearful of Jaden kind of doing certain things. Because eventually Jaden is to join the cheerleading team. And so he's at this football game, and he's, like, of course, a male cheerleader, doing everything that all the other female cheerleaders are doing. And so, like, we have this game, like, people, like, chucking, like, their drinks and stuff like that at this guy, kind of heckling him. And so we just have Joe and we have Lola eventually just leave because they're just like, no, I'm not gonna watch our son eventually get heckled or just get things chucked at him. And so they end up leaving. So Joe only came to one game to see his son, and then he just left. So eventually we have Jaden, who is to eventually be at lunch one day, and he is to see a guy named Chance. And so it seems that Jaden eventually is to keep looking at this guy, and he looks back. Eventually, it takes them to go to this one Halloween like party where Jaden is dressed up as Bowie, the singer Bowie, and the other guy is dressed up as a skeleton. And so they kind of are off by themselves, and so these boys end up starting to kiss. And it's like, oh, okay, like, hey, cool, like, he found somebody. But it seems like this guy is to, like, not advertise, let's just say, that he's to be gay, or doesn't want anybody to know that he is. So, like, so they're kind of keeping it on the down low and whatever. But we just continue to have Jaden, who is to consistently get bullied by people. And we just have this one text thing that he ends up getting where, like, it's just this repetitious on and on thing about that, let's just say that Jaden shouldn't exist, let's just say. To just kind of avoid any kind of harsh words here. And so that way this person would be tempted to, like, do something that they should not. So what ends up happening is we just have a scene where Joe is just to continue to walk and walk through a number of locations, eventually stopping at certain diners and certain locations, trying to get food and whatever. So he also ends up going to certain locations to do these little speeches and stuff like that, trying to tell people to stop bullying and stuff like that. So Joe is to keep going to these spots, and all of a sudden we have one person who is to just kind of mention about a certain channel that has a certain kind of people on it. And so Joe is to just slap a card on this guy's table and then to walk off. And Jaden, who is with Joe, is telling him, it's like, why did you do that? Like, that guy is never going to change. That guy is never going to learn. Like, you slapping a card on his table, and you should have punched that guy out. You should have fought that guy. And, like, we have Joe, who is, like, trying to make change, but also, like, eventually we just get to the point of these walks where eventually he just starts to become a celebrity to certain people, where like photo shots are being taken and stuff like that. And so we have Joe telling everybody like, hey, like find me on Facebook, or like me on Facebook or something. So but Joe just keeps on walking and continues to go through his journey. uh And so, like, we have these real fun moments with Jaden and Joe, where like Joe is to eventually go and find these things to cook for him and Jaden, and they're having fun with that. Like, he's like, hey, this is the only thing that I could really truly cook, so like we're gonna have some real good time with that. Uh, so eventually we get further on in here, and so Joe is deciding to go to a gay bar to eventually try and like just kind of talk to people there or whatever. And so Jaden is telling Joe, hey, you're probably going to get hit on. And Joe is like, yeah, I probably will, right? So supposedly Jaden is to mention like, yeah, there's probably going to be like a Cher there or something. What if Cher hits on you? And Joe is like, well, like, I don't care if a Cher is going to hit on me, but hey, if there's a Dolly Parton there, and coincidentally there is. So Joe is to eventually go to this bar, and he is to talk to somebody who is to mention about how like there was a church that was to basically tell him that like since he is to be gay, that he is going to go to hell. And so this guy is to mention, it's like, well, fine, then I'm going to go to hell then. Like, that's where I'm going to go. Like, I don't care. Like, freaking, like, this is how I want to live my life. So we have Joe, who's in response, who's just like, well, like, you know what? Like, looking at all those like church people, and like they end up having like this certain kind of reputation for doing certain kind of things, and so how could they judge you for living your life and dot 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 dot. Like, I don't want to sound very uncomfortable or whatever, or uneasy for anybody that lives their kind of life their whatever way. So uh all of a sudden we have Dolly Parton, like the one character that like Joe was like, yeah, I can't wait to see Dolly Parton. So of course this person is to hit like Dolly Parton is to hit on Joe. And so Joe is to talk about his son, and so the girl is just like, well, hey, or Dolly Parton is to mention like, well, hey, like, how about you have like just brought your son to the bar? Like, we're fine with that. And so that's when we get to find the actual pin dropping of Joe mentioning, it's like, well, my son is dead. I'm like, wait a minute, what? 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 Huh? So we find out that Joe has been going this whole road trip, and he's just been imagining that his son had been there the whole time with him. And I'm like, wow, that's so beautiful and that's so nice. Like, we had this one spot uh where Jaden was talking about like music with his dad, and like talking about Lady Gaga, and we have Jaden who's to like do the song about I was born this way. And like I thought that spot was just kind of funny. And like Joe actually knew the lines of like I was born this way, and because like the song is kind of catchy, and so Jaden is like, oh my god, you knew the words, and like Joe is just like, yeah, like freaking the song is catchy, and so then all of a sudden Joe is making the joke. It's like, well, hey, like now sing a song that I know, sing me some Willie Nelson. I thought that part was kind of fun. That part was kind of fun. So, uh, but yeah, so eventually we find out that like the whole time, like Jaden had been with Joe the whole time, in spirit or whichever. Which I thought that was like that was beautiful, but that was also just like a kind of like a pin drop where I was like, so what now? Like, so this kid, and then we end up finding out the actual story that happened to Joe's son, which I'm just like, wow, that's just really sad. It's sad. So we end up finding out that this kid was to always get bullied. We have this one spot where Jaden is to like, and these are all flashbacks, of course, because Jaden is sadly dead. Sadly, Jaden is to have a snake in his locker at school, and so Jaden ends up just smacking his locker, and it doesn't quite close, but whatever. He has this freaking snake in his locker, and so everyone is just like consistently pull pranks on him. And so there's this one spot where he's just to, I think, go into gym class or like eventually maybe just go into his like his cheer outfits. I don't know what exact scene this was, but we have all these guys that are pulling Jaden into this shower and eventually mention like, hey, like since you like some D, I'm gonna give you some D. Uh, some thing that rhymes with trick, let's just say. So uh like eventually I'm like, oh my god, like, and I'm sure like a lot of people might have this like, I know there's everyone who eventually gets bullied in school. Like I was like a very tall guy, but in certain schools like I was targeted just because like, oh, so like you think you're tall, and so like we have to like take you back down to our level and stuff like that. So like when I was in like schools, like especially like in southern schools, like I used to get beat up a lot just because it's like, hey man, like you're the tall guy, you're the only tall guy, so we got to make an example of you. And it's like, okay, like whatever. Like I used to get beat up by like three guys at one time. It's just like, getting used to it. Like I don't care. Like freaking like. Eventually, it's like, well, like you could fight back, and it's just like, yeah, but a lot of times you just get beat up by multiple people. What can you really do? Like freaking like teachers didn't do crap, or it's like, what can they really do? You just get fights in there all the time with people, because like one magical freaking word could just lead to you getting beat up by somebody. And it's just like, why did, like, I don't think I even said anything. Like, or there are sometimes you could just say nothing and still like this person is just going to want to punch you in the face for whatever reason just because you're there. Like, I don't know. So like if you maybe accidentally stepped on somebody's like back of their shoe, they're just like, hey, what's up? It's like, dude, I'm sorry, I just like I got freaking like nudged a little bit and I accidentally hit your shoe. I'm sorry. Freaking, you get punched for that, you get beaten up for that. It's stupid. uh but anyways, going on, I'm sorry about my sob story. So uh that's not anywhere equal, I'm sure, to Jaden's life. But I'm just saying my 2 cents, sadly enough. Anyways, so Jaden is to uh, Jaden is to eventually go and be uh, a person who is deciding that like things are just too much, and like he just consistently gets these things all the time that eventually to make him feel like he's an outcast within his world. That eventually he has this whole essay that I guess he had written about how like he like never felt like he could fit in or whatever, and like even with when he has these friends who are girls, like eventually it seems that nobody is really wanting to be there for him, and like there's these spots where Jaden and his father are kind of talking things out, where like Jaden and this girl are practicing out in the front lawn, like doing their cheers, and Joe is like, "Hey, like, could you go and like practice in the backyard instead of the front yard?" And Jaden is like, "Well, what's the difference?" And Joe is like, "Well, I can't hear the TV. Go in the backyard because like I can't hear the TV." He's just coming up with some kind of excuse. So Jaden goes to the backyard to practice, and so like they, so eventually we just continue to just go on with this, and so we eventually find that Jaden had taken his own life, sadly, and so uh, Lola and Joe were to just kind of like find out like that this had happened, and so that's what caused Joe to go on to this walk and try to create change and try to do the best he can with like the whole like situation in front of him. Like he started walking, I think like every like there's a lot of times where I just kept hearing like Idaho or something like that, or Utah, or like, so you can kind of see like he's doing this like cross country kind of thing. So what ends up happening with Joe is at one point we have Joe who starts to eventually have things not quite go well for him. We have Joe who eventually is to lose like some of his equipment, because we have this guy who's like walking with this like giant cart of a thing, and it has all this like camping gear and has all like his clothes and everything like that. He ends up going and parking this thing by some diner, and he walks out of the diner because he like, or no, like this rest stop or some diner or something, so that way he can wash himself, so that we can kind of take a towelette like bath in the sink. And so once he finishes with his shower, he ends up going out and realizing that like his stuff is all gone, and the only thing he has left is just this backpack. But that doesn't stop him from like, dude, I'm just gonna keep walking anyways. So like even if it means that he has to go and just have like a sleeping bag and just like sleeping in that, like that's what he's going to do. So he continues on with this, and so eventually what ends up happening is Lola and Joseph are to eventually go and meet Joe, and so there's videos of Joseph wrestling, so he's like, oh man, like Joseph is getting really good at wrestling. He's getting like his transitions are getting a lot smoother. If anything, uh like the kid is like talking about maybe dropping a weight class, and like his father is like, no, like if anything you're too thin anyways, like maybe you should go up a weight class, like maybe you should start packing on the pounds, like you're doing great. So but we eventually have this moment of like just Joe and Lola kind of having these conversations with one another, and these like awkward moments, and so and then eventually Lola is to tell Joe, it's like, you know what, like why are you actually doing this? Like is this like, it seems like you're just creating a celebrity for yourself. It doesn't feel like you're like trying to do this for Jaden. It's like, figure out what you're really doing. And like, so there's kind of a twisting and turning of words that may not sound as good as the movie, or maybe like maybe there was some certain conversations in here that didn't actually happen in real life because this is based on a true story. So, uh, so eventually Joe is to eventually just continue to go on his journey, and eventually there is to be some guy who ends up delivering all of this stuff to Joe, like delivers this new version of his cart, delivers all of this stuff, like freaking like jugs of like Coca-Cola and water and all this stuff. And so Joe just grabs this man and hugs him. He's like, "Thank you," because like I kind of wondered if this guy would eventually just get like help from people just because of like eventually people are just like, heck yeah, freaking like we're with this guy, like go and do it, man. Like, and so like that was kind of a nice spot to see. And more than likely who like I don't know if it was probably a random person or maybe it was just like a delivery of some kind of thing where like the wife probably paid for it, uh and so this guy just dropped this off at this certain location that this guy would be in. Who knows? But anyways, we eventually get to this spot in this movie where the sheriff is to eventually come and find Joe Bell and kind of say it's like, hey man, what are you out here doing? And so Joe Bell is to just kind of like give him the paper and kind of mention like he's that Joe Bell. And so we have the sheriff that's like, okay, all right. So if anything, Joe Bell is to go to this like sheriff's place where it seems like people are like getting to like know about Joe Bell. So we have this sheriff who's like, hey, like when's the last time you had a warm meal? Like maybe I can get you something for free and whatever, like get you some kind of food, like help you out. So uh and plus also the sheriff wants to also do this little like speech thing for Joe Bell to just kind of do this speech. So we end up finding out that the sheriff, I guess, had a son also that was to, I believe, be gay. I believe. So, like, we have like these two people on the same kind of path, and so, uh, really, just the rest of this is just to have like Joe eventually do this speech, and just trying to create change. But here's how this movie sadly ends, which I'm just like, man, they could have ended it there. They could have ended it there. But so we have this sheriff who ends up finding out that I guess some pedestrian was ran off the road. And you're thinking what I'm thinking right now. That, of course, I'm like, oh my god, no. Like, come on, like, don't end this with a sad story. But that's how it rolls. So all of a sudden we see the sheriff who is to eventually go to this spot where this accident happened. And so we just see Joe's stuff just off to the side. And so we just see a sheet over Joe Bell's face. And so the sheriff is to look at Joe Bell one last time and then kind of put the sheet back over him. And like they just cart him off into the ambulance, and that's just the way the story ends. And then, of course, they do like the end credit scene where there's just a bunch of like pictures of the real Joe Bell and his family and all kinds of stuff. And I was like, well, yeah, that's kind of really nice because this is a true story. So like, hey, freaking like, there's only so much that they can really do and blah 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 blah. But anyways, like, it would also be like when you always go through these like based on true story kind of movies, you kind of wonder like what all really happened because there's a lot of times when like after the fact like you'll see this like featurettes or some kind of something where like people will say the truth where it's like, oh well, this moment didn't really happen, but we tried to have to like perfectly like put this thing together. And so yeah, so with that said, I think that's all that I wanted to say about the movie Joe Bell. I don't know how well this will be received, but I'm just doing another movie. I saw this, and so I'm like, I might as well review it. Hopefully people are nice in the comments and whatever. Uh, but yeah, like, and I'm sorry about putting up my experience, my life experience, but to just like feel that I had any comparison to this person. But I just thought I would just kind of throw that in there that schools are hard. Like freaking like you not only have to worry about your studies, but then you also have to worry about a fist coming into your face, and like that happens, and you have to deal with it. So, anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.